All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming to our October Pick Your Poison Part 2 with Connie. So if you missed it last year, it is up on our YouTube page. Connie did Pick Your Poisons last year, and we had so much fun with this. We decided to
Let's keep going.
Let's do Part 2. So I will turn it over to Connie. And go ahead, Connie.
Well, welcome everybody to Pick Your Poison 2. I'm going to be sharing some plants that have been utilized in literature, but also in history as murder weapons. And so I'm going to start first, basically going over what is a poisonous plant. And so in order to classify as poisonous, it must contain something that's going to cause some degree of discomfort, physical or chemical effects. Some can be fatal. It affects humans and or animals. And because there are some plants that are harmful to animals that aren't going to be harmful to people. And that's why it's an and or. And there are many different methods of delivery or ways that you can come in contact with a plant that could cause harm. And there are about 700 toxic plant species in the United States. Rest assured, there's over 20,000 native and naturalized seed plants in the US. So it is a small percentage, but still coming in contact with even one could be deadly. So you want to be aware of what's out there and how to avoid it. When I mention method of delivery, these are some of the ways that you can come in contact with a toxin. It can be ingested, and sometimes that's accidentally. It looks like something that is edible, or somebody could be evil and put it in your food or drink. Inhalation, a lot of plants that may be in powder form can actually be inhaled, and that can create the effects. Absorption, so skin contact, and injection, which I suppose could be accidental with overdose, but a lot of times that's much more intentional. Acute would mean that you're exposed to it one time. And then there's cases of chronic poisoning where it is, you have contact with it over a period of time. And certain plant toxins become more problematic the more you're exposed to it, because your body retains it and becomes more sensitized to it. So again, different ways it can be administered. And I don't want you any to go home and try this at home. That's not the intent of this at all. Last time, and again, it's up online, last time I focused on 4 plant toxins: aconite, atropine, opium, which also derivatives of morphine and heroin, and cyanide. So today I want to concentrate on strychnine or strychnine, depending on who you're talking to for pronunciation. I'm going to call it strychnine, ricin, digitalis, and I'm not sure if we advertise hemlock, but I decided to throw in a bonus plant. So we have hemlock in here. But again, there's 700 species, so there's a lot more. I've listed just a few there, and some of these you may grow. You know, you may have them in your yard. So again, to be aware of them. And I'm going to start with strychnine, which comes from the strychnine tree. And it is, let me go forward again. Primarily, the poison is going to be found in the seeds. They're going to be more deadly. The thing I found so frightening about strychnine is it was very commonly used in pesticides as rat poison, especially in the 1800s when a number of large cities would have rat infestations. So it was readily sold over the counter. Unlike other poisons, well, like prussic acid or cyanide, you could buy that at a pharmacy. It was still frightening. You could buy all these poisons, but something like prussic acid had to be purchased at a pharmacy, and you had to sign a poison register. So there would be some record of your purchase. Buying rat poison off the shelf, nobody would know who was buying it. Toward the late 1800s, they started to put some restrictions on the sales, and I believe by the 30s, it was no longer readily accessible. But again, it's very dangerous. It's a stimulant, and the more you're exposed, the more sensitive you are to it, the more quickly you're going to react to the poison. And it metabolizes very quickly, absorbs very quickly, and goes through the system. It causes very violent contractions and spasms. And you see at the top, I've called it the smiling poison. That's what they've dubbed it, because of the severe muscle contractions that will happen in the face. So somebody that's died from strychnine usually looks like they're smiling. There's a grimace. In the process of convulsions, if you have somebody lying on a bed that's been affected by strychnine, their whole body will arch up. So just the head will be down and the feet and the whole body will arch with these convulsions. And ultimately, it's going to cause cardiac failure, asphyxiation. The lungs aren't going to function. To treat strychnine, they've used activated charcoal to help absorb the chemical in your body. And a Valium has been used in other anticonvulsives, and with the idea of lessening the convulsions so that you can weather through them. If you don't have enough to have it be lethal, it can help you go through that process without doing that internal damage. Now, in literature, I have to, of course, mention Agatha Christie, as I did last program, because she has been dubbed the Queen of Poisons. She loved using plant poisons. She liked knives and guns and things like that too, but she loved plant poisons, and she used them in a number of her short stories and novels. And why did Agatha use plant poisons as a go-to? Well, one, she worked as a nurse in World War I, and she worked in a hospital pharmacy in World War II. So she did compounding. She actually mixed medications. She knew about dosage. She knew about side effects. So she had all that working knowledge from her volunteer work. But in addition, she had 30 specimen gardens at her home. So very likely she grew a number of these plants if it was climate inducive to grow them there. So she had a real working knowledge of plants and how they would impact. And she used them readily as murder weapons in her stories. They were a favorite go-to for her. Her very first novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, featured strychnine, as did Passenger to Frankfurt. Has anybody read Passenger to Frankfurt? I haven't, but it's on my list now if I can find it. But certainly The Mysterious Affair at Styles, and it's the first Hercule Poirot story. So again, strychnine featured in that. Another favorite author of mine, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes novels. And he featured strychnine in the story The Sign of Four. And my favorite line, maybe it was just Basil Rathbone that said it, "Elementary, my dear Watson. Who diagnosed strychnine poisoning in The Sign of Four? Watson. And how did he do it? The smiling face on the corpse." So again, pointing to strychnine. In history, a lot more usage. Last program, I mentioned Cleopatra, because Cleopatra liked to use all sorts of plant poison. She didn't limit herself to strychnine, but she certainly used it, but not on herself. She would use it on slaves and handmaidens to see how it would impact and how it would cause death. And if we believe the history that she died from a snake bite, obviously all those plant poison deaths were pretty extremely awful, and she didn't go that route. But she was known to have tried out these in different dosages on people under her control. Thomas Wainwright was considered one of the first serial killers. And in the late 1700s, he killed at least 3 people using strychnine and did it for insurance money. So again, a lot of times the reason for these murders is for money, and valuables and possession. Jolly Jane, I also mentioned in my last program. So if you watch that, Jolly Jane was a nurse in Massachusetts in the late 1800s. And she was called Jolly because she was so cheerful. Little did we know she was a serial killer that delighted in killing people and watching them die, usually her patients. But she didn't limit it to her patients. She liked killing friends and family too. And she didn't just use strychnine. She liked mixtures. So she would mix strychnine with morphine. And fortunately, she was finally convicted. And let me check, at least 31 people. She was convicted for murdering 31 people, probably many more. She died in an asylum. And but she told people she just liked watching people die. I'm sure she tried to kill them in the asylum too. Ethel Major, very interesting, 1934. She murdered her husband using strychnine, put it in his food, but she wasn't caught for poisoning her husband. She was caught because a dog ate the food scraps and died. And that's how she was found out. Because the dog died. I don't know how bad the husband was, but it concerned authorities more that the dog died. So that was Ethel Major. Dr. Marcel Pitot was a doctor in France in the 40s. He offered safe passage to Jewish families. Instead, he offered it. He didn't provide it. He murdered families and individuals with strychnine and stole all their valuables. And he was convicted of murdering at least 24 Jewish people, but more likely well over 60 people. Dr. William Palmer and Dr. Cream, I would like to go into a little more detail because they're probably actually more famous or infamous, I should say. Dr. William Palmer was called the Prince of Poisoners, and according to Charles Dickens, he called him the greatest villain that ever stood in the Old Bailey with first successful conviction for this serial killer. Now, as it says, he was a doctor, he was a surgeon. Wouldn't you think that would have provided enough income for him? Obviously not enough. He liked living the high life, and he was a gambler. And so to keep his gambling and to be able to pay off his debts, he decided it was really great to use strychnine to kill off people and collect insurance money. And just some of the people he murdered, at least 12, his wife, 5 of his children, some in infancy, his mother-in-law, his brother, and a number of friends. But he wasn't caught until 1855 when he killed his friend, John Parsons Cook, a fellow gambler. They like to go to the races together. I guess Cook won quite a big purse, and Dr. Palmer was a little jealous, and so he killed him using strychnine to take his money, and he was caught. He was convicted, he was hanged, and after the hanging, the noose was divided up into little pieces and sold as souvenirs. So a very well-publicized and probably very well-attended hanging in England. And Dr. Thomas Cream. Doesn't he look like such a debonair, nice man? No, serial killer. And actually, many think this could have been Jack the Ripper. He was actually born in Scotland, moved as a young child with his parents to Canada. So raised in Canada, attended McGill, became a physician, did most of his research or studies, specialty studies as a doctor on chloroform. And so when he went into his killing modes, he used chloroform and strychnine, kind of a combo. He killed his wife, his mistress, 2 of his female patients, and 1 male because he was having an affair with his wife and he found out. So he was actually convicted of murdering the man, sentenced to life, serving in Canada, served 10 years and was released from prison. And rumor has it it's because his father died and left him a very large inheritance. So we think maybe some cash passed hands. Anyway, he was released from prison after serving 10 years in 1891, promptly moved to London and began killing prostitutes. And it said that he would offer them treatment for alcoholism and drug use. And he would use morphine, not morphine, he'd use chloroform and then strychnine. And he actually verbally talked about how much he hated women. He was convicted in 1892 and hanged for killing 4 women, but we know it was probably many, many more. He was only 42 years old. So thank goodness he was caught. How many more years could he have done this? Let's move on to a new plant. Ricin's really bad too. Castor bean plant, I think a number of people grow it. Kind of a tender annual, I guess in other climates could be a perennial. And some of you I never was fed castor oil. Anybody take castor oil as a kid? No, your parents were all nice. They didn't make you take castor oil. Fortunately, castor oil, the processing to make castor oil removes the ricin. Thank goodness, because ricin is incredibly deadly. Before 1978, it was untraceable and untreatable. And it was, I believe, found out more about it because of the murder of a Bulgarian dissident that I'll talk about. But even small doses are very lethal. if somebody ingests it, first they're going to start with mild symptoms, burning of the mouth, nausea, and then it's going to go into complete circulatory collapse, convulsions, coma, death, causes incredible internal hemorrhaging. It just destroys everything. Symptoms appear in 4 to 24 hours, untreated. Again, there's no antidote, but if there's no remedial treatment done, death is in 3 to 5 days. Now, of course, we know that Agatha used it. However, a wonderful fact you can take with you. This is the one time in all Agatha's writing she got it wrong. Because ricin, not much was known about ricin. She used it in this short story, The House of Lurking Death, but she got wrong when the symptoms appear. And in the story, I believe somebody ingests it. It's put in somebody's food. So it's a one-time Agatha misused plant poisons in terms of her writing. But I forgive her because, you know, who doesn't love Agatha Christie? Now, ricin in history, a lot of incidents and a lot of attempted murders and some successful murders using ricin. And usually, and it's the KGB, they would use umbrella guns with a ricin pellet. And they would inject these into somebody standing at a bus stop or, you know, waiting in a crowd. And undetected, again, it can kill in 3 to 5 days. A number of these people survived these KGB attempts. The one who didn't was Markov. And so I'll tell you a bit about him in a second. Dr. Deborah Green, an American physician who attempted to murder her husband. I'll tell you about her. In powder form, it's been sent in letters to Barack Obama, to the mayor of New York, to the Pentagon. Again, very deadly, inhaled, coming in contact with us. And Nicholas Hellman was a lovesick teen, and I'll talk about him too. I can say that in order to treat this, sometimes they'll use activated charcoal, again, for absorption. They may put somebody on a lung machine. They may do kidney dialysis. So those are all things that attempting to be remedial with it. But again, no antidote. Let's talk about Markov. Markov was a Bulgarian dissident who defected in 1969, moved to London and became very outspoken against the Russians and against communism. And he actually worked for the BBC as a journalist. An on-air person. So very vocal, which didn't make anybody back in the home country happy. And so in 1978, he was waiting for a bus in London and he felt a stab in his thigh and he had been shot with a ricin pellet with an umbrella gun. And he basically died 3 days later. They had shot him with a 1/5 a milligram of ricin in the pellet. So it's a very tiny amount and basically massive hemorrhaging. And I believe that's when they started to actually learn more about ricin and how it's used. One of the other people that was targeted with an umbrella gun was stabbed in the neck. Fortunately, the pellet did not break. And that person survived the attack because it remained intact, but very scary as a weapon. Deborah Green was going through a very miserable divorce, and I guess decided it might be better just to kill her husband. And so maybe she grew the castor bean plant all on her own, and she used the beans and put it in his food. And he didn't die. It was an attempted murder. He did have some long-lasting damage caused by ingesting the ricin. But when that didn't work, she decided to set her house on fire and ended up killing 2 of her children in the process. And so she is currently serving 40 years. This happened in 1995. In 2014, Nicholas Hellman. Poor Nicholas has been dumped by his girlfriend, and she gets a new boyfriend. And the new boyfriend has a birthday. And Nicholas decides to take a scratch and sniff birthday card and embed ricin in it and sends it to the new boyfriend, who fortunately lives. But when the police come to collect Nicholas, he decides to have a shootout with them. And so Nicholas is now serving 20 to 40 years for attempted murder. So pretty sad, but homebrew of Ricin. You know, they're not buying this from the grocery store. If that's dire enough, let's move on to a new plant, right? Foxglove, one of my favorites. These are pictures from my yard. I love growing foxglove, digitalis or digoxin, derivatives of foxglove. And oh, we went too far. Okay, so it's actually been used probably before the 18th century, and everything I've read seemed to indicate that use of digitalis for heart problems was actually discovered by a female herbalist, or what might have been a folk woman or wise woman, or what you might have called a witch long ago, and then shared with physicians for its use, and primarily using it to more regulate heartbeat or reduce fluid around the heart. And digoxin is still used today to modulate blood pressure and to treat heart ailments. Another interesting thing, I don't know how true it is, but in the 19th century, it was used for mania and epilepsy. So it's believed that Van Gogh was treated with foxglove for mania, and that it can cause, with a lot of ongoing use of digitalis, it can cause you to see yellow auras. So could all those beautiful paintings he did with all those swirls of yellow be simply an overdose of the digitalis? Could there, people are surmising that could have influenced some of this painting. It's been used as an antidote to aconite poisoning. I talked about aconite last year. Aconite tends to speed up functions into a dangerous level. So they would use digitalis to lower blood pressure, to kind of slow things down, to try to counterbalance that rapid increase of functioning in the system that aconite causes. But too much digitalis, too much of a good thing, can start with headaches and insomnia, but eventually can go into irregularities in the heart and death. So it can be very deadly. Now, in literature, can you tell Christie liked digitalis? She loved it. She used it in The Body in the Library, Appointment with Death, another Poirot, and Agatha Christie's Crooked House. It used it in that. I remember an Appointment with Death, it was injected very much on purpose to kill a very nasty woman nobody liked. So not too sad, but still, it was wrong. We know it was wrong. And another one of my favorite British authors, Dorothy L. Sayers, who wrote all the Lord Peter Wimsey stories. If you get a chance to read those, it's pairing Lord Peter with Harriet Vane, and they would investigate murders. But digitalis was used in this particular Lord Peter Wimsey story, Unnatural Death. Now, in history, many times using digitalis as a murder weapon, and Marie Becker used it very successfully. Marie was Belgian, excuse me, 1930s. She was a 55-year-old housewife having an affair, decided her husband had to go. There was insurance money. And so together with her lover, killed her husband, I believe using digitalis, probably put in tea. And she collected the money and then grew tired of her lover and killed him the same way and collected his money. And she used all that great money to open a dress shop. But it must not have been particularly successful, because then she started dosing her patrons, usually just to a point of unconsciousness or sleepiness so she could steal their valuables. But it's very likely some of them died and got overdosed with digitalis. But she wasn't found out about any of that. When they finally investigated her is because she had a dear friend that came to her and was complaining about how awful her husband was. And Marie offered up some digitalis so she could kill her husband. And that's what notified the authorities. This woman reported her. So she was jailed, sentenced to life in prison, and she ended up dying in prison. And it was during the 40s, during World War II. But a famous Belgian. Yeah. Charles Cullen is probably who most people know of, having used digoxin, an American serial killer. Still serving, I believe he's still alive in prison. This is around 2006. Over a 16-year period, he worked in hospitals as a nurse in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and he used digoxin, primarily killing ICU patients. And later he would say it was all mercy killings. But many of these people that he overdosed were on the road to recovery. They were not dying, they were recovering. And what's particularly frightening is he would work at an institution or a hospital. There'd start to be some suspicious deaths. And some instances they let him go. Other instances he left on his own accord, but he was able to go and find work again. So kind of this rampage for a number of years going through these hospitals, killing people. He finally was caught when a co-worker worked with police to get a confession from him. And he was actually, they confirmed 29 murders, but think it could have been hundreds. And he is currently serving 24 consecutive life sentences for this. And probably the most, well, not most interesting, but strangest case of digitalis use for murder was what I found with the Tene Bimbo clan. The clan is, they had a lot of nefarious type of illegal activities. And one of their sidelines was poison for profit, or having the younger members of the clan marry very old men and kill them with digitalis within 6 months and collect all their belongings and their money. One instance, a 26-year-old Tene Bimbo clan member married an 87-year-old man in September, and he was dead by November. And at least 8 victims aged 85 to 94. No, I'm sorry. When I'm 85 and if I'm widowed, I am not going to marry some 25. I'm sorry. I'm not that silly. But obviously, they thought that they'd gone to heaven, and they do, unfortunately, within just a few months. All I could find is that some of the members of this clan may have only served a couple months for this. I had a lot of trouble finding more information, but I would not drink tea with any of these women. I mean, if you ever get offered anything, I would not want to go there. But it was billed as the foxglove murders, and that was used, and I think putting it primarily in tea or food. And as our bonus plant, let's move on to hemlock. And both poison hemlock and water hemlock are each here. Water hemlock actually being the most toxic, deadly indigenous plant in the United States. But let me talk about poison hemlock first. And I don't know about you, but boy, this sure looks like the Queen Anne's lace that crops up in my yard. And what's so scary about poison hemlock is that all of it is toxic. It's not just the flower or just the stem. Just a small amount can kill, but it looks, you know, it's got that fern-like structure that looks like a carrot. It's in the same family as carrots and parsley. The one thing is the stems are hollow and speckled with purple blotches. And I think they actually call that Aristotle's blood, the splotches, because, and I'll mention Socrates, but symptoms, dizziness, trembling, and then paralysis. So it's a very painful death from hemlock. Also called devil's bread and devil's porridge. I wonder why, right? Water hemlock, again, is the most toxic, more toxic than poison hemlock. But again, in the same family, same appearance, and no antidote for this. So it may start out with just an upset stomach and nausea, and then it's going to go into seizures and eventually cause death. And I know that real concern about children around water and maybe seeing this as something they can pick. And so very scary. Now, Christie used it in 5 Little Pigs. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the story. A woman is convicted and hanged for the murder of her husband, and she actually didn't do it. She thought her sister did. And so she basically, her daughter, once her daughter grows up, contacts parole because she wants to find out who really did murder her father and wants to clear her mother's name. Very, very great story, but using hemlock as a murder weapon in a drink. And in history, the most famous death by hemlock, again, is Socrates. And this was 399 BC. He was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth of Athens. How many people do we know that do that today? And yet we don't make them drink hemlock. But that was his sentence. He was to drink a cup of hemlock. And it was documented. You can find written information about that death that occurred from hemlock. And they describe it as fairly gentle, where he starts to feel a numbness in his legs, and he can describe that. And then it slowly goes up his body until he's gone. Well, what we know about hemlock is it's incredibly painful. There's convulsions. It's awful. So very likely this cup of hemlock was a mixture, and very likely it was mixed with belladonna, with morphine or opium, to ease those, to have a sedation quality so that the hemlock would not cause those type of severe reactions within the body. So that's the most famous hemlock death. And I guess I have to close by saying, maybe we should heed Alice, because she has a very, I think, important message. If you drink much from a bottle marked poison, it is almost certain to disagree with you sooner or later. I do want to also show you, though, the bibliography, and I want you all to be my character witnesses that I did this program. I own a lot of hardcover books on poison plants, and if anything ever happens to my husband, I'm calling you all to be character witnesses. But I used a new book this time. I added some books, and I want to point out the last book that's called Is That Cat Dead? And Other Questions About Poison Plants, written by John Robertson. John Robertson is head gardener at Annick Garden, Poison Gardens in England. And he takes tours of people through the poison garden. And there's a resident cat at the garden who likes to sleep in the plants. But when you walk into a poison garden, everybody that walks through the gates and sees a cat goes, is that cat dead? Because they think the cat's dead and has eaten something. And no, the cat's healthy and has not chewed on anything. But I just thought, what a great title for a book. Thought it was wonderful. So thank you.